Hello, everyone, and good evening. My name is Martha Joseph, the Phyllis Ann and Walter Borton Assistant Curator for Media and Performance here at the Museum of Modern Art. And I would like to welcome you tonight to a performance by Basel, Abbas, and Ruanne Abou-Rahme titled An Echo Buried but Calling Still. This performance is a part of their exhibition here in the Kravis studio, a larger project called May Amnesia Never Kiss Us on the Mouth. I see some familiar faces here, which is great. For those who are new to this series, the exhibition closes tomorrow, so if you haven't had a chance yet to see their stirring installation, Only Sounds That Tremble Through Us, you have until 5 p.m. tomorrow to please come back and experience it in this room. Just a reminder, tonight is being live streamed. I would like to thank the many people who helped put this exhibition and performance series together. The project is co-commissioned by MoMA and the Dia Art Foundation, so I would like to thank curator Kelly Kivlin, director Jessica Morgan, and Jordan Carter, who were fantastic collaborators on this project. I'd also like to thank my colleagues in the Department of Media and Performance, Stuart Comer and Ani Yanevsky, as well as our incredible performance team. We couldn't do it without you, Lizzie Gorfain and Olivia Rousey, and our incredible tech team here tonight, Paul, Mitch, Omer, Chris, thank you so much. A reminder to please keep your mask on during the performance. If you must exit, there are exits on the back, at the back on either side. So please enjoy the show.
ومنهم مات من تعب السنين ومن كفر ما شاف هم بحياته. ومنهم مات مشان الوطن يا عين، ومن شان الوطن ضحى بدماته. قالت لي يا فرج كلامك مثل طعن السكاكين، دموع العين جوا العين باتوا. انا نايتر وليت غاب عن سنين وبعدني بالبيت معلق عباته. راعي الغنم يسرح مع النعجات وله يسمع له نغمات شبابي. لما عاد راعي الغنم يسرح مع النعجات ولا يسمع له نغمات شبابي. ولن تفلوح جمر النار شايات بلمحة عين على العين غابي. ولن تفلوح جمر النار شايات بلمحة بصر على العين غادي. اللهم
Everyone, I'd like to invite you to please stick around for a post-performance conversation with Basel and Ruanne. Thank you, everyone, for being here. For those of you tuning into the live stream now just for the conversation, my name is Martha Joseph, and I am the Phyllis Ann and Walter Borton Assistant Curator of Media and Performance here at MoMA. It's my pleasure to be joined by Basel, Abbas, and Ruanne Abou-Rahme after that stirring performance. Your work is so visceral to experience and quite intense, and I know that was a long performance, so I want to say thank you for agreeing to be in conversation with me.
This is the first time that I'm...
Yeah, it should be
potentially the last time that I do a talk after a performance. It's a bit intense, but yeah, no, it's good to be in conversation with you, of course.
I'm grateful, and it's been a pleasure to work together for the past 4 years on this project that I know you've been developing for the past decade. So the larger project is called May Amnesia Never Kiss Us on the Mouth, and we're sitting here in the Kravis studio among the installation, which looks very different during the day. And we'll keep tonight relatively brief, but you work in so many different media, and yet the core of this project really is embodiment and performance. So I thought it would be a nice opportunity to kind of track performance across the different aspects of May Amnesia, even though it lives in different media and different forms. So maybe you could start us off by taking us back a decade to the very beginnings of this project before it was even officially a project, and what started your interest in this source material that you've collected and then developed into this larger work.
I suppose you're looking at me, so I'm going to start.
No,
Yeah. Okay.
no, you're good at this one.
So the project 10 years ago was a very different kind of project. It wasn't really a work, so it wasn't like, oh, let's make a work, right? It was basically a moment in 2011 with the revolutions that kicked off in Tunis and Egypt, and we were sort of experiencing it from Palestine online, like the rest of the world. but in this sort of like a special scenario where we're kind of part of the wider Arab world, but we're also not because we're separated with checkpoints and all of that. So, so we were experiencing it online, and it actually started just kind of like a gesture, which was to download this material, not to keep it, but just to sort of share it. So it was so much that you couldn't find it the next day if you wanted to share it with someone. So first we'd start collect links, and then the links would just die, and like you wouldn't find the video anyway because a user would remove it. So then we started downloading the videos, and then we sort of really like that gesture stopped there in a sense that we kind of problematized what we were doing, why we were doing it. We collected all these videos, and we had like a long exchange with art historian Tom Holler in the Journal of Visual Culture, and that kind of stopped there. But we kept collecting material. The material changed, and we were basically collecting a lot of songs and people singing and dancing, mostly from Iraq, Syria, and Palestine. And we were just really attracted to that material. We didn't know why we just were. And then at some point, it really started to be clear that, you know, this was a sort of way that, you know, these communities were holding on to the last thing they had left. You know, these were communities that were under threat. And so this sort of song and dance, but also documenting it and putting it online and sharing it was part of this resistance to their erasure. So that's kind of the first layer.
And I know you talk about this, but I'm struck just in your description of that process of the fact that there's this kind of fragility of the communities that are representing themselves in these videos that they're uploading online, singing and dancing in mostly public space, though not exclusively. And then also the fragility of the virtual afterlife or the digital afterlife you described, going back the next day and realizing the links had been broken. So there's kind of this transience that in certain ways you counteract in your work by taking that footage, saving it, and then turning it into something new. And we saw some of that footage tonight, but not exclusively. And often in your work, you'll combine found footage with also footage that you've shot yourselves. So when in the process did you realize that those documents of everyday folks performing would turn into then performances that you would create?
I mean, it took years, actually. I think it took us a while to figure out, you know, what this material was doing, what, you know, the reason why, in a way, the material was calling to us and kept kind of demanding our attention. And obviously, the material itself also started to increase. So, you know, in Palestine, song has always been a really important form of resistance, especially because people were not allowed to many times publicly gather. It was illegal to assemble. So many times the site of the wedding would become actually the site in which people would articulate forms of political resistance. So it has a very long tradition, obviously. So it was something that we were very aware of, but I think it took us time to figure out why were we, you know, investing in this material now and collecting it. And so, yeah, it took years for us to get to the point where we thought that we wanted to essentially create performances in conversation with the archive. It wasn't, you know, there wasn't this idea like, oh, we want to make a project. It just, you know, it happened in that way, and
yeah, I mean, I
it
suppose
happened very organically.
In our practice, we're always looking, like, we're interested in the archive as like something that can be activated in the present. rather than as a document that we, fetishize or anything. Yeah, so I think it comes from there, like wanting to activate the collection or the archive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know you've you looked at the archive in your work before May Amnesia, and for those of you who are less familiar with the May Amnesia project, as I mentioned before, it's co-commissioned by the Dia Art Foundation and rolled out in multiple parts, starting in late 2020, winter 2020, actually during the pandemic. And the first part, which was titled Postscript, so kind of beginning from the end, was a part of Dia's Artist Web Project series. And then there was a second part online as well that hosted more of this kind of, for lack of a better term, archival material that you're talking about. But it's very interesting to me because it does multiple things simultaneously. In a sense, there is a page that's an index that includes, I'm forgetting the exact number, but hundreds of these videos, and there are tags that reference location. They reference sometimes like an emotive feeling. They reference sometimes a specific dance. But then there's the main part of the web project series actually creates new resonances between that footage with then the new footage that you shot. Could you talk a little bit more about that and also what that new footage is and how it relates?
Well, I mean, essentially the performances. Should I start? I feel like I answered the other one. I don't really want to. So the performances, we worked with a group of performers that usually work more electronically. I feel like I have to give all this background to be able to answer this question, really. They're people that we have known for a very long time and we're very close to, so there was a certain level of trust. It was important for us to work with people who weren't necessarily practicing the same kinds of forms of song and dance that we were seeing in the archive, because it's also about taking it in other directions and pushing it into other directions. And it was really very much about the performers just using their bodies and their voices, which was something that none of them really do because they work very electronically. And really spending time with, we collected about 20 videos for each performer that we thought would resonate with them, and then just spending time with that material, talking about it, thinking about it, and very much creating improvisational kind of performances that were focused on, taking very small fragments. So this idea of, remaining in something that is broken, or kind of being in the negative space, rather than working towards a whole or the idea of repair. So it really does think about, what does it mean to be in a constant state of mourning, to be in a constant state of having to fight off, your own erasure, your community's erasure, land that's disappearing, narrative and memory and history that's also under attack. So you're in this kind of, vanishing mode the whole time. And how is it that song and dance become really significant articulations of how people, lay claim to self and space and community, even if it's a fleeting moment. And then just pushing that further, thinking about that further and further when the performances that we created that were very much about an embodied state of being. It wasn't really about making a performance. It was about lingering in those broken parts and yeah, thinking about how, the negative space that you're thrust into can become then a generative space, right? I don't know if I answered. I don't know what the question was.
We're all learning and talking together. The performances that you're describing, you're saying these performances we created, because in essence you've created quite a number of different performances over the course of this project, but you're referring specifically to working with these performers in Palestine and the performances you created with them that then you filmed and worked that footage into both the installation that's on view during the day, and then also we saw a lot of that tonight in the performance. But you mentioned that they're mostly electronic musicians, and they wouldn't instinctually maybe use their bodies in that way, or it didn't necessarily always feel natural. I feel like one can tell in watching your footage the care that you really took in working with them, and I know from our discussions the great care and time you put into working with them. But you've also talked about using the body as a sampler, and I'm interested again in this idea of taking something quite technological, like quite digital, this idea of sampling and the influence that it had on music for the last several decades, and actually making it analog again. Could you talk about that process and what you meant when you talked about the body as a sampler?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was quite literal. So in a sense, they know what a sampler is. They work and they use it all the time. So essentially that conversation, like they really understood what we were talking about when we talked about it in that way. And I think also the embodied state that we were sort of trying to get into was, really all about thinking about that material and what it means and how we can, as Ruanne said, how the fragment can be a generative thing. So I think that part came more naturally to them, the sort of taking a fragment and then doing things with it, looping it, and then, or taking words from somewhere and taking a melody from another place, putting those words on this melody, or taking a rhythm and putting your own words and creating it. But the hard part, I think, was the sort of, we weren't looking for a performance, right? We were looking for a moment that thought and reached that stage, And then more than that, we were also going out into the landscape, right? Into, specific areas in Palestine that were under threat. And we would have to enter that embodied state in those areas. And, we film ourselves. We have one or two more people with us that help us, but we sort of film ourselves. We don't use tripods, we use monopods, so we can leave very quickly if we need to. So we're always in areas that are under threat. And that was the most difficult part, I think, the sort of being able to, get to that state in the moment when we were filming. And we would go many times, and sometimes it just wouldn't work because, we were not creating a performance. We were getting to something, and sometimes the performer couldn't go there, simply. So we would just have to stop shooting and come back again. So I think that was the hardest part, and they had to really trust us, to get there. And we had to work on that trust for a very, very long time. So I think that's the harder part. They're already amazing musicians that we're we know they can do it. It's just about working through it, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, your description of kind of physical impossibilities or needing to be prepared for a physical disruption at any point in time being worked into the project feels kind of germane, because in fact our exhibition was supposed to open in October 2020 and we experienced a delay because of the pandemic. And it was also our original intention to actually bring the performers here to MoMA and perform here in this space, which for many reasons in the end wasn't able to happen. But so we had many conversations then about how do we put together a performance program in light of this change. How do we rethink what performance means in relation to this space physically and also New York? And you ultimately made the decision to invite mostly local performers to respond to the project and respond to kind of this larger body of knowledge that you've been putting together. And so we've had performances by Scratch, Hiro Kohn, who's with us here, and also Mukata, who's also with us here, over the course of the past month, who created new work essentially responding to your project. Do you want to talk about that invitation, how you made it, how you think of it? Also, in general, you often have projects that are more about creating a body of knowledge, or just as much about creating a body of knowledge as they are about creating discrete artworks.
I mean, do you want to start?
I'll start if you want.
You seem to have something. I do have
Not
something.
really. I had something. No, I don't.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think it goes back to the virtual space that we created or that we're thinking about, and taking these moments or this that we collected online. We also, other than the tags and organizing them, we also transcribed and translated about 100 of them, which took a really long time and a lot of effort. And we want to continue doing more of that. And for us, it's kind of like, thinking about these. So we want to be able to to almost honor these moments, right, as moments of resistance that need to be, because even when we were translating, people were like, "Why do you want to translate this? Like, what's, this is just some person with a bad voice, singing on the street, and the words are not really that poetic. Why are you translating it?" And it became even more important for us to do it, right? Because for us, we're honoring these practices, we're honoring these people, and we're saying that these are serious or things that are, they're like the memoirs of our day for us, and they're narrating their own erasure and their own resistance in their own voice. So that's kind of like an initial reason why to have these, but we want to have them accessible, but we want to also have a third part in the website, which is essentially commissioned essays and tracks, songs or music or responses that not necessarily use it as samples or anything, but kind of respond to these ideas in this collection. And so it kind of like came from there, and we had like, there's a list of, writers and musicians that that informed our practice, but that also we see a sort of conversation with. And so it kind of started there, yeah.
I mean, I'll just add something, which is that, collaboration is really important for us, and, many of our projects, but this one, to a large extent, is also about building a community around the project. And I think that in the work itself, there's a call. So we're really invested in inviting those, or beginning those other inscriptions into the project. So it's not just our own inscription. So that's why I think the performance program that we did here was really, very enriching in terms of like opening up the project to different intersections, and not just through sound and performance, but through kind of political and social practice, and so I think that's very significant for us, how we can open up the work to other inscriptions. So.
Yeah, we've talked about how your work is very much localized in the Palestinian experience, but also expands outward. Like you've talked about taking Palestine as a starting point, but then really thinking globally and engaging with ideas around decolonization or resistance and its relationship to embodiment more broadly. And I wonder too about the ways in which some of the conversations we had during the pandemic open up wider or more points of access for different types of audiences across, maybe here in New York or across the globe, to your work specifically. I was thinking about, well, less of a specific question, but there was a moment during the pandemic under the George Floyd protests, and breath was mentioned very explicitly in the text that you wrote that appears in the work, and also I know, Ruanne, you included breathing exercises in this performance tonight. So I think in ways there are simple material experiences of the body that kind of connect and go more broadly across different political positions.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, no. I mean, that's a big part of what we're trying to do. I think the ghettoization of Palestine, or the idea of Palestine, is very dangerous, and very it just alienates Palestine even more from the world, when really we're talking about global conditions of dispossession that intersect, and what's important is how can we build community and something collective that allows for a multiplicity and doesn't try to homogenize or smooth over tensions and contradictions that exist, and they should be allowed to exist. So I think the project is really thinking about that idea of collectivity, community, what is the we, and how can we have a we that is expansive and allows for multiplicity, essentially.
Yeah, I like this question of what is the we. You had a wonderful listening session event at DIA as a part of the programming related to this project, and Ruanne, I know you said explicitly, it has been ringing in my ears, the statement that the performer's voice is both theirs and not theirs. And I wonder if there's anything you want to say about kind of the relationship between the individual and the collective in terms of the way you're thinking about community and collectivity here.
That's 2 in a row.
You're not off the hook, Basel, just because I said Ruanne, sorry.
No, I mean, when we're working through the archive, what was really significant in the archive was the call and response. So a lot of these songs were maybe started in Syria and then moved to Iraq and then arrived to Palestine and then went back. And in that process, they also shapeshift and mutate, and people, insert their own lyrics into it that are specific to where they are from, and some of the rhythms that we were listening to, it felt like we don't even know how old some of those are. So what was really interesting for us was the idea of the echo, and the way in which the echo is also a call, and that the echo can be with people and people's bodies, but it can also be with the land itself. So these were the things that we were thinking about, and really thinking through, what does it mean to take this material and then perform it again, and how is it yours and not yours, or it's speaking to your wound and not your wound. And so I think that's a really interesting space where you don't have to have the same wound to feel the sense of solidarity and being with, and somehow that feeling that it is yours and not quite yours either, I think is a very important thing for us to hold on to right now in a really catastrophic world. it feels very necessary in terms of how we think about something that's beyond solidarity.
That's really nice, and I'm glad you brought up this word echo. So the title of the performance, An Echo Buried, but Calling Still, where does that come from?
Hello, yeah. We wrote that. So the postscript of the project, actually, that came out in October 2020, was a text that we were sort of writing for the project as a script. So we usually start our projects with the text, as in our video works. When we make a video and sound piece, it starts with a text and then we compose sound to the text, and then the video actually comes after that. Obviously, it's back and forth, it's not final. So we were already writing a text for the work, and then the pandemic hit. And so the text was thinking about mourning. And then actually, when the pandemic hit, we started to think about things, the project, it was hard for us to just pretend like it didn't happen, basically. And so that sort of resonance and echo and all these sort of elements, and we were in New York as well, so we were supposed to go to Palestine to film, and there was like sirens all night, so it was quite a specific, particular sort of moment, and I think it really resonated with the work. And then the text was kind of finished in that period, and that's the basis of the postscript and the text of the whole project. So that's where the title came from, but it's a text that we wrote then.
I mean, I like that we felt the echo tonight, both formally in terms of the delay and reverb and echo that we just heard here in the space, but also I feel like often there's an operation in your work where things function simultaneously, formally and conceptually, and thinking about your just kind of general interest in countering linear time, or thinking about ideas of return, and how the echo can essentially be a way of thinking historically in the present, or like feeling historically or hearing historically in the present.
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure. I mean, I think the echo sort of is before echo comes like resonance, and before resonance is sort of, maybe like a horizon that you're trying to sort of reach to. And so sound allows you to almost like permeate physical space in a way that opens up a different horizon, or allows you to, the possibilities, opens up a different space of possibilities. So I think that sound sort of informs our practice, in that way, and very much we thought about it in relation to like living in Palestine, like day to day, whether it's through, when your life and your daily life is so fragmented there, and your line of vision are literally blocked, and so thinking about fragments and sound and echoes and resonance becomes like a very almost mode of resistance that we then think about in that way, and makes its way to our work in that way.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because we haven't so much acknowledged the physical fragments around us. You often use these panels in your installations to kind of break up the projection, and you often in the past have used wood, and then for this work here, you used concrete and metal, which has, I think, a visual resonance with some of the footage, like thinking about walls and borders and that are they're actually imaged in the footage that we see. So there's a tie-in there too. We're trying to keep this kind of short tonight. So I'd like to give us the opportunity to start to open it up to other questions, and of course we can continue to talk as well. I feel like there's so much we haven't said about this project, and we've been keeping it very focused on the performance, but you're tired, I can tell you're tired.
Yeah, I think we, just responded to this was,
Are there any audience questions at this time? You can wait for the mic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the powerful performance. I was particularly intrigued by the electronic sound effect. So as I remember, I saw a majority of the scenes are like natural landscape or human body, or even like you included a lot of close-up images of flowers and plants. And I was really intrigued by that images of nature or a human body is juxtaposed with electronic sound, electronically mediated sound. I mean, I saw you use your voice, but it's mediated like digitally and mechanically. So, I was curious, is it like a symbolic sound of the negative image that you use in the, what's the effect or symbolic message that you wanted to convey through the electronic sound?
No, I mean, I don't think it's symbolic. I don't think that there's a symbolic. I mean, I think that, it's better for you to answer in terms of your whole engagement with electronic sound. You have a very long history of that.
Yeah,
but it's also, I guess, that I feel that some of the things that we want to think about and express in relation to Palestine, often feel that they can only be expressed in that mode. Basel and I, when we started working together, because we were trying to get to a different kind of formal and political language, to think about how the politics of what we're trying to get to in relation to Palestine can be articulated through sound and image in a way that also kind of pushes back, against a lot of the other like oral and visual representations that we were encountering at the time, we were both very influenced by electronic music, and so I and that has a whole huge, obviously, kind of political tradition in itself, right? So it's really, it's from there. It's a very long part of our practice, but I guess that the tensions and the, are an important part of our work. This juncture is an important part of our work.
Do you want to say more about some of the landscape imagery that was included that I know recurs in a lot of your other work as well, and you've talked about the land kind of almost being a third character in your work, but there were all those kind of specific plants that were included, and long shots of driving at night. Could you share a bit more about how you've thought about the land in relation to your work in the past?
It's a really big question. I think the land is obviously something that is under threat constantly in Palestine, and so when we first actually started working together, we didn't know what to film actually, so that's why we sort of started working with sound mostly. And one of the things that sound allowed us to think about was to sort of make the familiar strange, in order to so something had lost its potency from Palestine, the repeated image. And Ruanne was mentioning it earlier in the answer, which is we were searching for this other language, and yeah, so in the beginning we were just working with sound, and then slowly this idea of making the familiar strange, I think that's kind of, for me at least, drove me to sort of start filming again. And also the sort of, I mentioned earlier that a lot of these locations are under threat. And so it becomes really important for us to be there physically, to film there, to not just to document, but to actually be in the space and to do our thing in the space. So that's kind of how like the landscape becomes a character almost, not just in, because we're not documenting, we're trying to capture this like visceral experience of being in the land, and the land sort of holding its own like inscriptions, its own frequencies, and its own history, basically. Yeah.
Any other audience questions?
Hi, I was wondering if you could speak to spirit in your work, if you connect to that or not, especially in Palestine. I really feel in the Palestinian footage there's so much more than what we're seeing, and I really sense that, so I was interested if you could connect to the idea of spirit.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I think about it is this sort of other forms of living that surround us almost in certain spaces, and especially, so we have a project where we go to destroyed villages, and a lot of the times you can't find the destroyed village, so the way you would find it was through like vegetation. You see the vegetation, and then you know that the village is coming, and or that you've arrived to the contours of the village. And yeah, I mean, absolutely, this sort of visceral feeling of being in the land and moving through the land. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you have more to say about this, but it's an absolute. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we call it like a spirit, I would say, but there's definitely something that is otherworldly, let's say, present. And, you know, we think it's, or we see it as inscriptions in the land that's been there, that the land holds, that come out in different forms, you know. So it's actually when we were filming with the performers, there was this one melody that they all repeated, and every time the melody was sung, these birds would come and start. So they would, literally 2 birds would come and start, and it happened with more than one performer in the same melody in different places. So strange things like that were happening to us while we were filming, and they always do in Palestine in different, and we try to sort of include them in the work in one way or another. But yeah, and I think that's felt because, again, we're not really trying to document, you know, we're trying to capture that moment, that process, and it's all about us being there in the space. Yeah. No?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna add. I guess we think about it, yeah, as like forms of being, like different forms of being that are not necessarily also human, and then we think a lot about haunting and how things are haunted, and the way in which if we think about like spirit in that sense, we often think about it in the non-human form, you know, in the way in which the land and everything that is part of the land is essentially calling. That's what we think about a lot. Yeah.
I like that you brought up this word haunting, because I wonder about the ways in which your entire practice, in a sense, is a form of haunting or an experience of haunting. This like constant return, or
That's true. I think that might be, you know, that is true. You know, the returns, yeah, different forms of return, and things that are things that seem dead but are not dead. Yeah.
Other questions in the audience? Yes.
So I mean, maybe part of the conversation that has to do with spirits, but I'm curious about the color purple, just because it's recurring not only, you know, within the moving image, but also within the subtitles, and we're also watching purple now. Maybe it's not a non-verbal, intellectual idea, but I was just really struck by that as a continuous thread.
I mean, that comes from, you know, there's two different things, which is, one, we're very obsessed with these purple thistles from Palestine that are, essentially they're thistles that grow where the soil has been disturbed. And we encountered them, you know, very strongly when we made these trips to destroyed villages, and we'd go to sites that would be surrounded by these thistles and really huge. And it was incredibly powerful to also think about the thistle that is has a lot of beauty, but it's also obviously very prickly, and people see it as a kind of invasive species, and it, you know, it grows where the soil has been disturbed, and in the process of its when it decays, it actually replenishes the soil and allows vegetation that might have been at that space or in that site to return. So again, the idea of returns. And then there was another thing that we were working with images in the negative, and everything that is green becomes kind of purple. So that just happened, but it felt very much like it was, you know, kind of, meant to be in that way, yeah.
And if you've seen the installation during the day, you've probably noticed the violet window gel that we have on our large window to 53rd Street that gives the room sort of a colored mood and contradicts the idea of presenting the work in a black box. We have another question.
I think this is the closest I've been to Palestine, and this is the closest I felt home. Even though I'm Lebanese, I can maybe understand why Lebanon is not part of your point of interest and research, given the violent and racist history that we have somehow. That's my first month in New York, and that's the third time I see you. So there's like this healing side. There's so much that's being represented and translated out of feelings, out of existential memoirs, as you said, that needs to, and to feel it here in New York specifically, I feel it's a big thing. This is big, you know, like this feels big. And I wonder, being here, not in the survival mode that mostly when we are in the Middle East, we're in this constant survival, did you find a way to detach a bit from the impact of the content, because it's an intense impact of the content that might get you physically or energetically tired at a certain point, and how do you do that? What's your point of rest?
I mean, I think there were definite, I mean, you know, along the course of I mean, I think at first, when we first started collecting the material and we didn't know why, and it wasn't a project, it was just that we were drawn to it. We were very affected, and we were here. And it was difficult. It was, you know, it was both sort of a lifeline for us, you know, to connect, to feel connected to communities, but at the same time it was difficult. And then I think that there are moments that, of course, being here, you know, is a way in which you can have that, you know, space. So it shifts. It's not somehow static. And then there are moments when we were creating new performances in Palestine that were incredibly intense for everyone involved. But then, yeah, being here and kind of editing gives you a certain degree of distance and space. which is obviously a huge privilege, you know, to be honest. Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions? Well, because she mentioned that she has seen you multiple times, it got me thinking about iteration in your work and how your work takes multiple forms, and often you do these larger projects that live in different ways. And I'm thinking about how, you know, this exhibition here at MoMA is the first physical installation of May Amnesia, and now it's opened at Migros, and it'll open in multiple other cities over the course of the next year, which is very exciting. And Basel, you mentioned that the web project will have this kind of third iteration that will involve new commissions, but I wonder if you could maybe end on saying a little bit more about how you think about multiplicity in your work across forms. This is a structure that you've used in the past in terms of other projects that have had like part 1, part 2, what that kind of iteration accomplishes for you and how you think about it.
I mean, I think that, you know, so I think we're not just interested in, we're not, like, every time we make a project, we ask, like, who cares? You know, why are we doing, what are we doing? You know, and the answer sort of has to come outside of, like, us and outside, like, the art world, let's say. So I feel we're constantly trying not to be in an echo chamber and constantly trying to, you know, do things that matter for people, you know, not just for art and artists. And, you know, so I think that's partially why we always like to sort of take the ideas or our research and sort of enter multiple spaces with it. And naturally that takes on multiple forms, I think. And then also, projects never really end in a way, like they keep going and growing, and because we also insist on on sort of opening things up rather than closing them to sort of our own closed interpretation. This is what this is, but we try to like present things where the sort of person is imbricated and their own sort of reading into things allows the project to unfold in different ways. So I think, I don't know if that answers the question. Does it? Okay.
Certainly. Well, thank you both so much.
Yeah.